All right, welcome into the ArtGibbs Sports Business Podcast. This is episode 22, and in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about Lance Armstrong winning the 1999 Tour on a Trek time trial bike. Maybe it wasn't a Trek. We're going to talk more about that in this episode. All right, so again, a little housekeeping. Our question last episode was, who was the first athlete to be paid a salary of over $1 million in a single year? And that was Nolan Ryan, so the baseball player. So if you got that, congratulations. But that's the answer to the question there, Nolan Ryan. And again, visit us on ArtGibbs Sports Business Podcast on YouTube. We've got the channel. Our Twitter is @ArtGibbsNow. Website artgibbs.com. Podcast ArtGibbs Sports Business Podcast. And we also have a channel on YouTube, just ArtGibbs, and that is a lot of kind of more technical financial videos, pure financial videos you can go see there. So that's the extent of housekeeping today, so let's get right into it. So as I mentioned in the opener, we're going to talk about Lance Armstrong in the 1999 Tour. We're going to talk about Lance Armstrong in the 1999 Tour. So Lance... So let me take you back to 1999. Of course, Lance wasn't the Lance we know now. He was a great cyclist. He had won the world championships. He was, I believe, the youngest world champion at the time. He was a very high-end rider, very strong in the classics, had a bit of a sprint to him, and he won a stage in the Tour de France as well, actually. So he was a good rider, and he was at the time the best American, really. Lamont had basically retired at that time, and Lance was kind of the new kid on the block as far as it went in that sense for American cycling. And of course, he unfortunately became afflicted with cancer, testicular cancer that had spread throughout his body. He had a very low chance of survival. He went through all of that, and he had originally with Cofidis, the French team, and due to the cancer, due to his illness, they actually backed out of that contract. So he was left with no team really, and none of the other teams would really sign him. So at that point, when he came back, and we discussed this a little bit in the podcast with Dr. Cody Havard, we had kind of opened with a discussion about some of this stuff, but it was kind of us against them at that point. The U.S. Postal Service, an American team, they ended up being the only one that signed him. And the U.S. Postal Service, they had a contract with Trek. So Trek was this American bike manufacturer. It itself wasn't big. It wasn't, one of these top manufacturers, and certainly not in the European peloton. They didn't have that presence. But again, Lance was coming off of cancer. This was sort of his situation. These were his options. He signed with the U.S. Postal, and he rode a Trek. Trek worked, and they were able to get him to sign as well, so he would ride with Trek. So it was a good match, and obviously we know how it turned out. It turned out better than any actuarial table could have ever imagined. Of course, that fact has come up in court regarding the Tailwind Sports insurance of Lance's bonuses, and again, you can go read all of that in the depositions, things like that, but the point is, it went better than anyone could have expected, including the people that insured his bonuses. But, Lance went on and won 7 tours. Now, back in 1999, of course, it was not all smooth sailing. Lance's team was not a super powerful team, in terms of the riders on the team. There were good riders, and Lance was in good form, and George Hincapie was there. He was a great rider, but they were the underdogs. There were bigger teams, better teams. Some of his main rivals weren't there, based on either injury or that, opened up the overall a little bit for him. But he took full advantage, and then, in successive years, proved out to be the best at these long tours. So Lance rode a Trek. He rode Trek. Trek had signed him, and they embarked off on this 1999 tour. The only issue was, they did not have a time trial bike, which of course there were time trials in the race. So a time trial bike, for those that don't know, is going to be more aerodynamic, potentially a little bit heavier, and depending on the time trial profile, that helps, right? So if it's a flatter time trial, you're riding alone, you're out in the wind, aerodynamics becomes a bigger factor. Weight is less of a factor. Aerodynamics is a big factor. Obviously rigidity and those kinds of things remain big components as well. But wind resistance, obviously I'm not going to get into it here, but it's an exponential thing. And when you get up to these high speeds, 28, 29, 30 miles an hour, 31 miles an hour, you need that aerodynamic benefit. And so here they were, Trek, Lance, U.S. Postal. U.S. Postal was the only one that would have him. Trek, sponsored U.S. Postal and ended up getting Lance on the, signed as well. Okay, so they get there. They've got Lance signed. They've got the deal. They're getting ready to do the tour. Lance is going for the tour victory. He's not a favorite, but Johan Bernil believes he can do well. So they get to they've got to come up with a time trial bike. Trek didn't have the capabilities. They didn't offer a time trial bike. They didn't have time to get one that worked well. So they took a different approach. They went to a frame that they really liked, that they thought did very well. They looked at different frames, and they settled on the Lightspeed frame. The Lightspeed frame had a aerodynamic front. It was kind of a diamond front. And I'll post a picture of Lance's 1999 bike here, so you'll see it. But it had this diamond front, and it was a great frame. It was very rigid. Lance loved it. And so that's what they settled on. They said, look, we're going to use this Lightspeed frame that has this diamond front. Lance likes it. He rides well on it. And we're going to cover it in Trek. So they covered it in Trek, and that's what he rode. He had the deal with Trek, and he, of course, won the prologue and went on to win the tour. Did it on this Lightspeed bike, but with the Trek livery. And now, of course, after the tour, and after, once Lance was, doing so well, and Trek was doing well, when Lance was now a tour winner, Trek was now a tour winner. Then they went back to the drawing board and they built a time trial bike. And the time trial bike that Lance used going forward was, in fact, a Trek bike. And it was designed specifically for him. Over the years, Lance worked very closely with Trek. Trek they had an advanced engineering program that they worked to make the Trek Madone in 2003 that Lance rode. And that was named after a climb that Lance loved to climb to test his fitness, a 12-kilometer climb. So going forward, after that initial bump, Trek was able to work and create a bike that was a winning bike and that Lance would win with. And of course, Lance had, as part of his sponsorship deal with them, he got some stock with Trek, ended up selling that stock. It was right around an $8 million block of stock. And, it was sort of like the rest is history. That's what happened. They actually rode this Lightspeed frame and used that initial bump and, of Lance winning. And it was totally unexpected. And, like I said, some of his rivals were out that year. So the sort of top of the peloton, the top of the podium was a little bit more open than it was in previous years. But, of course, going forward in the future years and successive years, Lance showed, that he was the best tour rider and Johan Bernil the best director, and Trek, the whole partnership obviously created a huge dynasty. And Trek was a technical partner going forward with Lance, and it was a very good situation. So what are some other examples, or how often does this kind of thing happen? And you've got the Merton Sports Drink, where they offer an unbranded product, so that if you're a runner and you love it or whatever, it's very popular with runners. But there's other things as well, other applications as well, biking, etc. But those Merton Sports Drinks, you can buy an unbranded, unlabeled sports drink and use that. If you're sponsored by another drink company. Anyway, so this was just a quick podcast. I wanted to go into that and just kind of offer a little bit about that, talk about it. And it's something some people don't know, but They did indeed use a Lightspeed frame and won the tour, and then built a great bike company. And of course, a story going forward that was sort of second to none in many ways. So, all right, that was just a quick one. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time. Thank you.